she'll, yeah, so
I don't
she'll,
like cats either.
so
I'm not a cat person.
she'll watch this and she'll be really excited about this. Um, not everybody has to be a cat person.
No.
So then they're like, oh no, we got to replace it. And there's a practical reason because you don't, they're helpful with the mice.
They are. Yeah.
So we don't have a mice problem.
No.
It should be.
Well, they play with them or whatever.
My cat was getting really old and he just kind of lived in the garage and bed box.
So then that cat got replaced with Ash. And then, so Misty got replaced with Ash. This cat names are hard. And then they're like, well, let's get another one. I don't know why. So that one would be, oh no, I think Misty's what we have now. I don't know, whatever. I don't know the cat's names. And then Luke wanted a cat, so he got Basil. So we have a Basil. So there's 3 cats and a dog.
Oh, wow.
And
So
yeah.
our cat's all in the house.
Yeah, these are all in that, except for the one, like I was telling you before, the one got out, and pretty confident that that means we'll have more cats. So that's even exciting yet. No, those cats, we don't need a house. We don't need cats.
Getting old now, couldn't hear. I think his ears are gone already.
Yeah.
Fighting him. And so he's laying there in his box, and a little mouse comes along on his feed thing, just sat, and I had a mouse trap, I think, sitting up there. He just walked along the edge of the trap. Didn't get caught, but he's nibbling on the I was watching it from inside out.
They do that though. They just kind of play with it, and they'll injure it, and you're like, just don't let it get off somewhere and die, like under the fridge or something. Blah.
I've heard horror stories like our neighbors that her cat, one night they were sleeping in bed and it brought a live mouse and dropped it in their bed.
Yeah.
Okay, you'd literally have to put me in an asylum.
No,
Like, I would never ever come back from that. I would not be okay.
It is traumatic.
And that would
We
be
had one that
bad.
would hide them in your shoes.
What? What?
They would hide,
What?
yeah, put the dead mouse in your
Yeah,
shoe.
no.
You put your foot in.
No. I wouldn't put shoes on ever.
Animals. We're supposed to have dominion over creation, but cats basically have dominion over you. Especially when you're dead, they just eat you. So, all right. Well, that's fun. That's for a present.
Anyway.
I feel like this definitely belongs with Ecclesiastes, doesn't it? Nothing new under the sun. Oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah. Matt's going to read today.
Matt's going to read today?
Yeah, we never got it.
No, I said I was going to read
Yeah,
it.
I said-
Well, yeah, Mike is gone. Don and Karen is gone. So Rushes are gone. Oh, I think, who else is gone? Vetters are gone today. There's all sorts of people
Oh my
gone.
goodness, where is everybody?
Yeah, they all got things going on. My family's gone. So it'll be a light Sunday. That's okay. That's all right. It's up and down. Things happen. So I think we're on the back of last week's handout. Bobby, did you get last week's and this week's? All right, good. So we want to talk about, we just talked about government as a necessary evil last week.
Is it though?
Um,
Is it necessary? No.
Well, according to Solomon.
I mean,
And, if you believe that Solomon is inspired by the scripture,
well, I suppose you're right.
then you're going to say, there's always going to be government, but necessary evil, but always corruptible. That's what he said last week. Don't be surprised at the oppression of the poor or the violent perversion of justice and righteousness. Why? Don't marvel, right? Don't be surprised. Because high official watches over high official, the one above it, and the higher official is over them. And if you follow these sorts of things, you don't always know who those higher officials are. Yeah, but they're answering to someone. They ultimately everybody answers to God in the end, but in the meantime, who are they answering to? And that's the reason why they don't care about you. And don't be surprised at that. Solomon says he's an old king, right? And he spent the first 2 chapters telling us how he pursued all sorts of things that didn't benefit the people, just trying to make a name for himself, and it was all vanity. It was all a waste of time. Right? And I would suggest then you could apply Solomon's wisdom then to government. If you were in government, you would probably, I would take the same approach. It's like, is this really necessary for us to be doing? Are we the most efficient actor, to do this sort of thing? Like we've seen this with disaster relief. FEMA's not competent. They weren't competent in Lahaina. They weren't competent. I went to Houston after Hurricane Harvey. They weren't competent there. Ivy, which is in Florida, was that a year ago? Katrina was notorious. Katrina was in the news because it was a Republican administration. So the press was, the press coverage on that was, there. You can, if you do in Google, you can do keyword searches and you can see coverage and then you can compare the 2 years. The coverage is already off the first page from Helene. Whereas with Katrina, it would be going for another 2 weeks yet. But, and there'll be another one. And they're not competent. We haven't. The same thing with earthquakes. We see that too, where you're like, well, Matt would know this from building construction. Like if you're building California, there's rules and regs to try to, but they always cut corners, and you try to and you can pay off the inspector and all that. And then when there is the earthquake, you're like, what happened there? What was that apartment building? And there was the comedian that was in it in Florida. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Who was the comedian? Oh, it was, he was kind of he was critical of the government. George McDonald. Norm.
Oh.
Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. It's like, why did he die? And then there was the collapse of the building, and it was very strange. Very strange.
He died? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Norm McDonald's been down for a few years.
Norm McDonald?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was right after COVID. He was critical of COVID,
He was critical.
Yeah, well, because he's skeptical. I think that's one thing we could learn here from Solomon is to say, he's giving us insight into what we expect to be true. He's just telling us, no, it is true. They don't answer to you; they answer to whoever pays them, right? This is why lobbying is so effective. They don't get money from you; they get money from the lobbyists, right? All right. But he does give you that caveat, which we talked about last time. Even if there is profit of the land, even if it's the king being served, right? So even if you're working the field and the king takes 40% of it, it's still benefiting people, even if it's not as effective or as efficient, right? We look at it and say, well, that's theft. Well, okay, yes, it is. But on the other hand, the king's going to distribute that grain to people in need. And
Was that on the podcast you were talking about in the beginning about the serfs and that some men that even though they're free chose to be serfs?
Yeah.
It just actually worked out better for them.
Yeah. No, it's true.
That was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we always look for efficiency, and government's one of the least efficient things. Like I said, with hurricane relief, the local churches and the state officials and the county sheriff, and I mean, maybe they don't have the store of water and food and things that they need. So there may be somebody that's efficient at that, but there is. I mean, we have Samaritan's Purse, which that's Franklin Graham's thing, right? And
Grindstone Ministries.
Grindstone, yeah. There's people that are equipped for that don't even receive government funding, like just do it out of charity. I think that's the key. Is that when you put it into a payola system, everybody's palms got to get greased then you're going to have problems. Whereas if it's just charitable giving and just donations, GoFundMe's or whatever, that's it operates differently because there's like, well, what's the financial incentive to be fraudulent? There isn't, I mean, people will still scam it and skim off the top, and there'll be looting of those and things. And you're like, well, is it necessary to have government? Yeah, I mean, from Genesis, God did not give children to run free range, but he gave them parents, right? The question is, what a government, how efficient, how local, that's all reasonable questions, practically speaking. And the highest governmental official in creation then is mother and father. And then the lowest is the one that's furthest, right? Like president or UN or WHO or some international body. They're going to be incapable of governing locally. Remember we talked about this with COVID. I asked this question. I don't know, you probably weren't here yet, Vicki, but I was asking this question pretty regularly. Why is the response of Sheboygan County the same as the response of Wisconsin, or the same as the national response? Why isn't our response actually adapted to the local?
Right.
And they would say it was because we were monitoring caseload, and you're like, you're not monitoring caseload, you're extrapolating data from hospitals that you're guessing as to how many people. But I said our response was not people are dropping dead like flies around us.
Right.
I mean that was our situation. Our response then was inappropriate,
Exactly.
given the actual situation.
Completely, but I think it was just so based on fear.
Yeah.
They were able to fearmonger people to the point where, like,
Right. So that
you had to do it.
again, that's where the government official, they may end up doing more harm than good because they're not, especially the more that they have to govern. I mean, like our country would probably be better off as 5 countries, probably regional, split it into regions and just, and maybe there's a like a working agreement between those regional states, but groups of states, because the needs of people, Florida, throughout the Appalachia, as we saw, they have different particular needs than we do here, or than they do in the West, or they do in the coastal regions, right? So, in any case, we're not really good at government, but don't be surprised when you see it. But even so, even as the king is being served, everyone profits from that in some way, right? So, I mean, this is what people talk about taxation as theft, and they're like, oh, and the average tax rate being what, 40% in the U.S., something like that, total taxation rate. They're like, yeah, and our lives are about as comfortable and as prosperous as they've ever been in the history of the world.
It's true.
So you're like, okay, yeah, they're stealing our resources and our treasures, and maybe it's not sustainable in the long term, and yet the quality of life is high. So, anyway. You can't fix it. You can't fix it either. That's the other problem, because you don't have authority over the king. So sorry. All right, so let's talk about money, because we like to talk about politics, then money, then politics. So I think this is where we left off. All right, so let's do. I don't think we should do all the way to the end. I'll just read. Sorry. At least 10 through 17. Let's do that.
He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to seek them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much. But the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun. Riches kept for their owner to his hurt, but those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return. To go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who labored for the wind? All his days he also eats of darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger.
All right, hold up there, because then it's a change. All right. So some of these things probably sound familiar. I think we have similar expressions colloquially. Maybe they're taken from different translations. All right, so here, some of this is going to be fairly obvious, but remember what Solomon's doing. He's observing, and then he's going to think theologically about it, right? So first observe, and then think, like, what would God have me say about it? So when goods increase, they increase who eat them. All right, so the bigger your business gets, the more people you have to take care of, right? So we're just talking about scaling here. Like the next level, I think we talked about this last week. You go to the next level with a business, then everything scales with that, right? You're talking about more red tape, more bureaucracy, more payroll taxes, and just mouths to feed, basically. So you're like, am I really better off? Was I better when I was smaller than when I'm larger? I think about that with the farmers, right? I mean, a 15-acre or 30-acre farm is manageable by a family, a large family anyway, and maybe with a farmhand or two, right? But then you go up to 200 acres, you go 300 acres. It's a totally different scale, right? Then when you get into thousands of acres, like to manage that, you're talking about a large business. I think about the number of cattle too, right? I mean, if you have 5,000 or 8,000 head of cattle, you're talking about, that's a corporate enterprise, right? It's nothing at all like doing, even just a farm, like if you were just going to do subsistence farming. So you're going to farm a few acres maybe, or an acre, and have a few animals and raise them, butcher them, that kind of thing. the economy of scale doesn't really work out, right? You don't really, it tends to be a loss leader. My father was a hobbyist farmer, so we didn't really make money off of it. He enjoyed doing it, but it did feed us, you know? So you say, well, we lost money, but we gained food and connection to the land. So that's what's going on here. So what's the profit that the owners have, you know? Except to see the piles of grain and the animals and then see them go away. The profit is, you know, you have and then you don't. You have, then you don't. You have, then you don't. It comes and it goes. And so what Solomon's dealing with here, of course, is just that whole notion that you can create legacy through wealth. Now you can with extraordinary wealth, right? And you create foundations, and there's tax advantage statuses where you can make a name for yourself, whether it be, you know, Rockefeller, Carnegie, I don't know, Bill Gates Foundation now. We have more local. You can probably think of others, right? Where people would have just had obscene amounts of money, then create these charitable organizations, and then people remember them for their charitable giving. They don't remember how they got their money. That's also interesting. Or what scams they had to pull off to do that. All right. Well, that's maybe one way to avoid this, but even that is vanity in the end. Like, do you need a name for yourself? Yeah. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet. Probably because he's just worn out. Nope. You don't have the physical energy to actually get worried about things if you come home and you're just wiped out, right, Matt?
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, you just come home and you just crash. But that's actually sweet sleep, whether he eats little or much, right? If you work all day, it doesn't really matter much what you have to show for it. You're not going to be thinking about it. You're just going to fall. You're just going to go to sleep. But the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. All right, because one of the problems with having much is, of course, you have much leisure then too. And as soon as you have free time, what ends up happening?
You're worried about somebody taking it.
You're worried about somebody taking it. You're worried about getting more of it. You're worried about what you're going to do with it, right? And so there's a psychological, what do you want to say? I guess trend. I haven't heard as much about it as of late, but it was certainly a big, when I was at seminary, as they talked about workaholism. Do you remember that? You don't hear about it too much, mostly because I think people are working hard because they have to. There's less, workaholism are people who work all the time just because.
Well, I think too, because of the internet and everything, that's changed the work.
Mm-hmm. Right, the nature of work, yeah.
Right.
But what I was getting after is that it used to be that people would work just because they could, but they probably made enough money that they didn't need to work all that. But now we have the gig economy, like you're talking about. You do internet or online type work, which is, it's hard to call it work. It's not very physical, but I do some of this, right? So I understand. And it's not out of, just a desire to be working all the time. It's just financial necessity, right? So that's a little bit different. But this is always the problem, whether it's the work or the wages that the work earns. If you have free time, you're going to think about it, and you're going to be up all night thinking about it. And how can I do more? And how should I make I had day traders that I had as customers when I worked in retail, and those guys were like, talk about. I don't know if they were on amphetamines or Adderall or something, but they certainly acted like it. Bipolar, one day they'd be happy because they had a good return, the next day, and they were up early, of course, because you had to get to the floor and be ready to go right when the bell rings, and they're done by 3, and then they go home and they're angry, because they had a bad day. Day trading is not, those people didn't sleep. It was just 2 brothers, so that was even better because they competed against each other. So you had sibling rivalry going too. I took advantage of that, of course, to sell both of them stuff. Play it off each other. Oh, your brother got this, you should probably get this. It's nice. In any case, I think that's probably self-explanatory. Did I write anything fun about those 2 verses? The vanity of riches is seen in how worldly goods make for a hectic life. True. And are ultimately boring and never satisfying. What was this show? It was Stories of the Rich and Famous or whatever. Do you remember that?
Lifestyles
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
What's his name? Robin Leach.
Leach. Yeah, that significant voice. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you could tell that they were just bored. Then they build a new house because they're bored with the one they have. Only this is a hard thing to hear. Only the poor can live unencumbered lives. The surplus of possessions causes sleepless nights. We just read that. Those who shun wealth are ironically the best suited to receive it. All right, and then I quote from Chrysostom on his sermon on this. The servant is able to sleep, for since throughout the whole day they, servants, are running about everywhere ministering to their masters, being knocked about and hard pressed, and having but little time to take breath, they receive a sufficient recompense for their toils and labors in the pleasure of sleeping. Right? Their reward is actually that they can sleep peacefully at night. Not so the rich. On the contrary, whilst lying on their beds, they are frequently without sleep through the whole night, and though they devise many schemes, they do not obtain such pleasure. But the poor man, when released from his daily labors, having his limbs completely tired, falls almost before he can lie down into a slumber that is sound and sweet and genuine, enjoying his reward. Since therefore the poor man sleeps and drinks and eats with more pleasure than the rich man, what further value is left to riches?
Except to give it away.
Except to give it away.
That's the value in there. It's fun.
Yeah. There's one, I follow a lot of these financial channels, and there's one, I mean, he's a very successful stock trader. He used to work in industry, but now he has his YouTube channel, and you can buy his newsletter and that kind of thing. I don't know if you follow these financial gurus, but he's a Christian. He actually went to seminary, so it was kind of interesting, part of his background. I don't know what tradition, but he makes that point repeatedly in most of his videos. It's like, the reason why I'm working hard to get the most value out of my work, which includes not keeping the value of my work in US dollars, which are being devalued all the time, but putting them in, just like Jesus says, at least put it in the bank and get some interest, right? Don't just go bury it in the field or in the mattress or in the, or for that matter, in the safe or in the wallet. It's so that I can have that joy of sharing, right? One, I'm able to provide for my family in a time of need, right? So it's like Joseph with the dreams about the oncoming famine. Well, if you know that there's going to be times of financial difficulty on the horizon, there's no reason why you can't save for that. There's no promise that you'll retain any of that savings, though. That's the other problem. So you can't put your trust in it, but you can certainly, be wise as serpents, right, and save that. So, but that's one of the points he makes, and he's now resting in peace. So I don't think you'd mind me sharing. But when I went to visit Walt Friedemann before he died, Walt was big with money. He was treasurer here for 40 years or something, and for the village too, I think, right? He was the bookkeeper for the village. Yeah, I think he kept the books for the village too. I remember, it was the last time I saw him actually. We were just talking about something, and he was arguing with his niece about with politics, because Walt was very, traditional conservative person. I had great conversations with him about the communists at the University of Wisconsin, back when he went there.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Pre-World War II. Yeah. They were bringing these communist farmers from Europe. Anyway, and he made this comment, and it really struck me, because Walt left us, it was like $100,000 or something, $90,000, something like that, from a thriving policy, I think. But he was bemoaning how his portfolio had gone down like 30 or 40%. And I just thought it was interesting, because like, yeah, you worked hard for almost 90 years. I think it was 89 maybe when he died. And then even then he was thinking about how he had been saving for that, to be able to do the kind of things that he did for us. And yet, because of market conditions at the time of his death, it had been devalued compared to what it was under Trump. That was the conversation, of course, right? It was very interesting, because I thought about it. It's like, yeah, I can see how you labored. For some people is like multiple lifetimes, right? And yet at the end, you're still concerned about, did I retain the value of my work? And I think there is something to that, though. I don't think we want to bemoan like people trying to protect the value of their work. That's how we want to talk about money, is that God gives us work, and he does that so that we can provide for ourselves and others. And if that's being stolen from us, that's still not good, seventh commandment, right? So, and it can be stolen from us in various ways. So I think we can still be critical of that and try to work to improve that. Just like we say in the explanation, to help our neighbor protect, or to improve and protect his possessions and income. So, but Solomon says, yeah, well, good luck. All right. So, and then 13, we said, there's a severe evil which I have seen under the sun. So now this is autobiographical, all right, I think. Riches kept for their owner to his hurt, right? So there's no verb in there. That's the severe evil. That if you hold on to it, as Vicky was just saying, it ends up being a curse to you, right? And we have so many mythological tales about that. The dragon with his hoard of gold, right? Scrooge McDuck is another one, right? Are there other? Well, obviously Ebenezer Scrooge, Magoo, yeah, but Scrooge and the Christmas. I mean, that is the theme. Is like, why is it that Bob Cratchit and his family, why do they have so much joy even though they have so little, right? That's one of his questions, and Dickens was asking there. And I think, it very much is in this realm of wisdom, earthly wisdom. But those riches perish through misfortune. So you may just lose them, right? A bad investment, and then it's gone. Bad business, So buy the wrong island, make a bad investment. And when he begets his son, there's nothing in his hand for the son. So trying to protect wealth for your child, as our children, inheritance, is vanity as well, according to Solomon. That doesn't mean there isn't an inheritance, but the central teaching about inheritance through the Old Testament, the narrative history of the Old Testament, is that inheritance is a gift from God. That's why it is to be protected. Naboth with his vineyard, remember Ahaz wanted it. Jezebel conspires to get the vineyard for a vegetable garden, which is scandalous in and of itself, right? Because the amount of time it takes to prepare a vineyard, and then you're just going to uproot it all for annuals, or perennials, right? Which is it? The ones that you replace every year? Annuals, yeah. Vegetables are just annuals, whereas vineyard is perennials. And but the central issue with that story is that that's Naboth's inheritance, and had been his inheritance since the time of Joshua, his family's inheritance. God had given them that during the conquest, and had been in the family, and then to have that ripped away. And we hear about stories about that. Losing the family farm would be a similar kind of story. That's a scandal because, because we think it's a gift to us from God. Yeah, so the family estate, all these sorts of things. We don't really do this anymore because we're in a debt-based economy. So you're like, well, you lose something, you just borrow, and then you get or you just declare bankruptcy or whatever, right? And you just kind of move along. And you have your ups and downs, and you lose the house, you buy a new house, whatever. That's not true in this world. Like that hole that you would dig, there's no FDIC insurance when the bank goes bust. There's no insurance, period. You don't have that whole, all those legal protections that we have today. So he can make one bad deal and not have anything for his son. So that could still be true today. But this is Solomon talking about himself, I think. And if we look at Solomon's sons, immediately the kingdoms are split, right? North and south are split, Judah and Israel. And then Israel squanders their everything on unrighteous living. I just realized that the story of the prodigal son is the story of Judah and Israel. I don't know if I've ever thought of that before. I'm sure somebody has.
Say that again.
The story of Judah and Israel and Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and whatever, the northern tribe, that's the story of the prodigal son. Israel is the prodigal son that squandered everything almost immediately. The older son of the righteous one is Judah, right? Look at us. We stayed faithful. We've been here, right? So the restoration of Israel is the restoration of the son. That's pretty helpful. I might have to think about that again. You might hear that in a sermon if I remember it. And then this is one of those expressions that I think you probably have a version of this. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came. What is that? How do we say that? Do we say something like that?
Well, you can't take it with you.
Yeah, you can't take it with you. That's right, because that's here. He shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. I mean, it
You
doesn't.
come into this world alone or not alone.
Yeah, that's the one.
You leave alone, like you, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a really cynical view of things, isn't it?
Well, I mean, but it's kind of true, right?
Yeah. You come with nothing, you leave with nothing.
Yeah,
Something like that.
that's the way to say it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what Solomon's saying too. Like, I mean, we talked about how like people like the Egyptian pharaohs didn't stop them from trying, being buried with all their wealth, building large protected catacombs that nobody could get into. Grave robbers still managed to get there eventually, but yeah. Yeah, so that seems pretty, well, it seems just fairly self-evident, I think. Although I don't think people think about it, you know? Especially when you're young, you think you're going to live forever. And I don't know why that is, but it's just like, well, or at least you have a long life in front of you, so you have plenty of time to enjoy things. Solomon doesn't want you to not enjoy what you have. He's going to get there in a minute, in a few verses. So you might take that away from here, that like riches are bad and just give them away. That's certainly true. But riches are meant to be enjoyed and used, not meant to be stored in barns and bigger barns like Jesus talks about, right? It's like, well, what was the point? Like, or the rich man who feasted sumptuously every day, and poor Lazarus was at his gate. It's like you had this great opportunity right there in front of you, and the point is that you would have actually found more joy in taking care of Lazarus than with all your fine linens and your feast. And it would have been awkward and difficult, and you may have ended up with this deadbeat in your house that took a lot of effort and time. But he was right there, right? And to live for it's going to seem tangential, but I think it's connected. The primary reason why people say they don't want to have children, young people today, is they say they can't afford it. I just heard that a week or so ago from a young person. And of course, they say it to me, you know, who's lived on a pastor's salary and has 10 children. So you're always just like, it's certainly possible. I mean, there is scaling with children, right? Like you don't get a bigger house usually. You just find places to put them.
Right.
That's part of it. Well, and the you know, you get these studies where like it takes like $1.3 million to raise a child or something. I don't know. They talk about this, and I'm like, I don't even think those numbers are accurate. But even so, like that's actually priceless. And in the end, here's an essential truth: is that the value of a thing is always arbitrary. We try to value things in U.S. dollars. It's completely, but that's just what is the U.S. dollar? It's just an arbitrary token of value. It doesn't actually represent anything. It's not pegged to anything. It's not an ounce of gold. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything.
Especially if you print them.
So when you start to value things according to, you could value children according to their utility. That's what some people do. That's maybe a little bit better, except now it's like, well, I don't need children, so I'm not going to have children, right? That's where utilitarian gets in the way. Or if they're disabled or, you know, demented in some way or whatever, then you'll say, well, they're not valuable, right? Or if they're going to be, prenatal testing comes into play, and you're like, well, they have Down syndrome, and 90% of people potentially with Down syndrome are aborted. I don't know how many of those actually have Down syndrome. You often
Ours
don't.
was wrong with Hannah. They
Yeah.
told us that we did that stupid test, and I worried my whole pregnancy, and she
Yep.
was totally normal.
Yeah, exactly.
And then for the rest, I declined it the rest of the time.
Of course. Well, why would it matter anyway?
It wouldn't have mattered, and then they tried to pressure me.
Right.
Can you imagine that? They tried to pressure me to, well, she's gonna have a harder life, and then I'm like, no, we're good.
We get it the other way, is that they keep telling us not to have children because it's a genetic disease.
Yeah.
So, and they gave up trying to tell us that we should get genetic testing, and you know, but I can't say that my children won't fall susceptible to that. We tried to prepare them for that, but you know, they're going to think about like, because they saw like the difficulty of raising somebody like Naomi, and they're like, well, I don't know if I want to pass that on. And,
Right.
you know, the children that have the marker. Anyway, So utility is not helpful either. But it's almost always about money. It's almost like we can't afford. That's why I mentioned before, like, we actually are more capable of having children than we were when our families were larger, as far as like economic ability. What they call poverty is what was my starting pay as a pastor, you know? So it's like, well, yeah, we were in poverty level. Okay.
Pretty sure we were too.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are. Yeah, a lot of people are.
But I think but as kids, we didn't realize that we were poor.
No.
I mean.
No.
We didn't.
No, the children don't know. Well, they might know if their friends get the big toys or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, you had 7 too.
Or not me.
But he never. Oh, yeah.
My children have had access to things that I never, like, I would have had to like mow lawns all summer to have a supercomputer in your pocket.
Right. I know.
Where did that was handed down to you? Like, this is very strange, very strange. So I don't follow the argument, and I think it's this worrying about losing it. It's worried about just having it. And of course, our memory verse this week was, don't worry about your food and clothing, right? And then the very next verse is, consider the lilies of the field. How they neither toil nor spin, yet they're clothed, or consider the birds of the air. They don't reap or gather into barns, and yet your Father feeds them. How much more are you? Like, of course God's going to take care of you. But that's definitely an act of faith. To say, if I give this away, the Lord's going to return, or at least maintain that I can continue to take care of my family. And this affects, of course, support of a Christian congregation. That the average giving in the Synod is something like 3% of income.
Isn't it supposed to be like, every tithe is supposed to be?
Well, that's the Old Testament prescription. So because the Old Testament had a prescription, the New Testament doesn't, then we err on the side of less. Yeah, no, and that's the tithe was of all harvest, and or flocks and herds. But then there were additional offerings on top of that. So probably the average offering of a Israel person was something like 25% or 30%. Yeah, to the church. But the church was the primary social agency then too. You didn't give it. You weren't funding Medicare and FEMA and name your government things that have taken. This is a very important point, though. They have taken on the responsibility that God has given to the Christian church. And thus they're also commanding devotion, fear, and trust. Right? Trust us, we'll take care of you. No.
Well, that's
I trust God.
Mm-hmm. So many people have said that it's the churches and the small communities
Yeah.
that are stepping up.
Well, of course. And it's not our churches either, because we don't have that many churches there.
Right, exactly.
So it's the Baptist churches. Well, we can support the Baptists. Like Samaritan's Purse is a Baptist organization. You can support them in that work. Why not? We're talking about just making sure people are fed. And I don't care if they're Christian or not. They don't either. But there was an interesting webinar from FEMA between a PR director and the regional director. I don't remember what region they're in. And the PR person said, well, we're concerned about doing financial support for the churches that are housing people who are homeless because from the hurricane, because they're going to misgender them. They're not going to respect the trans people. Yeah, they said that. So we're not going to give them money because they're going to call people by their birth sex and not by their. So you can see, I mean, that's obviously a religious idea. It's contrary to nature, though, right? So it's very mystical that way, and contrary to experience in nature. And it's like you're gonna deny supporting people who are doing the work because they don't meet some kind of political agenda. Very strange. Very strange. All right, where were we? 16:17. This is also severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? Or, for vanity. All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow, sickness, and anger. Well, that's pretty sad, depressing. I mean, Solomon does say that it's evil that you can't maintain your wealth, that it's taken from you through misfortune, that you can't hand anything over to your children. What was the profit that you did for all your labor if you don't have something to show for it, right? I mean, this is why the founders of our country, We're informed by Christian ethics, if not Christian theology. And specifically, think about the founding documents. What were their concern? That the king was actually hindering people from protecting their life, their freedoms, and the pursuit of property. We call it happiness. You can read about it. Jefferson reluctantly changed that to happiness during the edits along the way. But it was pursuit of property, that you would have a posterity, that you would have something that you could give forward. That was the issue, right? And we don't bemoan that. We don't talk about it because we don't want to get political. It's the seventh commandment explanation. We heard it, right? Help our neighbor protect his possessions and income. So we can say that the actions of our government in spending our children's livelihood is immoral. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to act differently, right? But it's all an illusion. And anyway, it's evil. That's what he says, right? Yeah, it's evil. Just exactly that we don't have anything to show for what we've done is actually evil. And that he eats in darkness and has much sorrow, sickness, and anger about it. That's not good either. Because what does Jesus want for us when it comes to work and wealth and house and property? He wants us to be content. It's very hard to be content if it's being taken from you, right? Yeah. All right, so let's get optimistic finally. Because what did we miss in here? There's nothing, no God from 8 through 17, right? It's all down below again, under the sun, under heaven. Just frank conversation about life in this world, right? And the evils of it. All right, so now we can shift gears, 18 through the end of the chapter there.
Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy good of his labor, in which he toils under the sun, all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God, for he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart.
All right, so we finally have God mentioned. And what is Solomon's answer to all of this under the sun evil? How would you summarize that? It's good to eat and to drink.
But it all comes from God.
Yeah, so that's the distinction here. Up to this point, it's all been the fruit of your labor. Now, it's the good of his labor which God gives him, for it's his heritage. So
That's our heritage.
yeah, it becomes our heritage, yeah. And I think we talked about it last week, but how remarkable, when I walk through the cemetery, and I think every one of these people contributed to who we are today, right? And yes, it's right that we bemoan that we're not what we once were as far as numbers and scale, but we're here. And without that, there would not be a congregation here in this place, right? That's the heritage. There's a great hymn on this. God's word is our great heritage. That's another hymn that talks about this, right? So actually, the antidote to all the skepticism and taxation is theft and misfortune and scammy business deals and whatever it is to thank God for what you have and to enjoy it. And the only way you can enjoy it is by thanking Him for it as a gift from Him, whether you have much or little. And that actually sounds like we as Christians are just content with just letting people take what we have. But that's actually what Jesus says. He comes and he wants your cloak, or if he wants your, whatever, it's your cloak, give him your, whatever, I can't remember. Give him the other piece of clothing too, right? If he asks to go with you a mile, to go with another mile with him, right? You're like, really? You're going to give to the thief even more than what they ask for? And he says, yeah.
Something.
Yeah, what do we receive though? It's not earthly wealth, right?
No, it's definitely
Yeah, it is. It is. So there's I would say this is almost a paradox or a dichotomy, that you're caught in this tension. Like, it's not good to steal and let the worker work. We heard from James. We'll hear from Ephesians today. We heard it from James as well. That's true on the one hand. On the other hand, sometimes people won't give to the beggar because they're going to go use it to buy smokes or alcohol or something. And maybe there's ways to help them with that, go and buy them a meal, do that sort of thing. Or say, I'll be back, and go get them some food and bring it back. But that's not on you, actually. Jesus says, give to the one who is in need. And if they're going to misuse it, then that's on their conscience, right? He calls it burning coals, right, on their head.
Yeah, that was really interesting, the reading from Luther yesterday on congregation and prayer.
Yeah.
Is that from the large bag?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the third petition.
Yeah, I really like.
Thy will be done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About how it goes back to a mighty fortress, about take down goods, life, everything doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter in the end. It's not yours anyway.
It sounds like the Lord doesn't care about your work, doesn't care about giving you, or about wealth. He doesn't care about your posterity or heritage. That's not true. But as soon as you start looking at it and holding on to it so tightly that you're not willing to give it up, then now it becomes a curse to you and not a blessing anymore, right? Which is what he's talking about, right? Which God gives to him, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him the power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor. That's a gift from God. So if God has given you much, and given you to eat of it, then you can rejoice in that. But also, if he hasn't given you much and you have to depend upon others, that too is something you can rejoice in. Thank you for this gift that you've given to me, right? Church workers often have to depend upon the charity of their congregation. I mean, that's part of how it's been set up. I mean, when this congregation was founded, the pastor didn't receive a salary. There was no money. It was, here, we'll get you a cow every year, We'll put up a cow or something. Apples, potatoes, a barrel of beer, whatever, right? I mean, just whatever they had. He didn't have spending money. There was no cash salary. There was no life insurance. If the pastor's children got sick and they needed medical care, we just pull up your straps and find a way to take care of them, right? So that, the anxiety of that, we're not used to anymore. Actually, we have more anxiety probably than they did.
I was just going to say, we have more anxiety because they all just, in community in general, take care of each other.
And it doesn't make sense because we have all these safety nets, that's what we call them, and yet we're more anxious. Mm-hmm. But it's because we have the safety nets and we don't live for each other. We live alone.
Right.
And as soon as you live alone, you're going to live actually apart from the body of Christ, especially, which is also a way of living apart from Christ entirely. Is by not making your needs known to the congregation. So he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. So he's not even concerned about tomorrow. He's not really thinking. Jesus talks about that. Don't worry about tomorrow. Right? He's not going to dwell unduly on the days of his life. Like, how many days do I have left? I don't know. It actually doesn't matter. It's like the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Enjoy what he's given to you. Enjoy the day that he's put. This is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice and be glad in it. Right? That's the psalm. Shouldn't be that hard. And yet, it is. And I find that Christian congregations are as susceptible to this discontentment, right? Always looking for tomorrow and for bigger and better. We talked about that last week, I think. Wanting more and more and not simply being content. I mean, even as a pastor, I think about, pre-COVID, we had 80 people in church on Sunday. Post-COVID, it's 60. Maybe averaging even less than 60. I don't know. Where did those people go? Well, actually, a fair number of people have died in the last 5 years. Some people have left. Their kids were confirmed and they stopped going to church, that kind of thing. And there's other reasons too. Some people have moved. Would I prefer to have more people? Of course, because the value of what I do isn't on having a full Bible class or having 5, right? Or preaching to 3 or preaching to 100. The value, this is my point with value. When we start to attach value to numbers and scale and whatnot, larger has its own share of difficulties. It's not necessarily easier than smaller. So, what did we say here? I think that's the text. What did I write? I wrote this last week, so I don't remember exactly. The main point of the book is articulated. Enough is enough. Not as in like, stop it, but whatever you have is enough. At first, Solomon tried to find wisdom through observations, experiences, and insights into the world. That was chapters 1 and 2. And maybe 3 a little bit too. He learned the world was far worse than he had ever imagined. Now God has helped him to learn true wisdom and a peaceful, happy outcome. True wisdom is the fear of God. And the fear of God is this: once a person is overwhelmed by life's difficulties and by his own total depravity and incapability, he is dashed to the ground completely helpless and hopeless. Then, and only then, can he turn to the one last alternative, the triune God, the maker of heaven and earth, who would also send his Son to redeem sinful humanity, and his Spirit to sanctify and lead his redeemed people. All right, so we're talking about fear, love, and trust here. The fear of God means trusting that God will take care of him in his own time and in his own way, absolutely everything. Life's problems, life's disappointments, life's sadness, life's apparent meaninglessness, life's total sin and depravity, and yes, life's outcome. God knows, God cares, and God does it all. All right? I would expect that most people, if you push them, they would probably say, God gave me my life. God takes care of me when I call on him, but everything else is my responsibility. I think that's how most, like you'll hear this thing, whether it's politics, in civil estate or in the church, even in the home. If we don't do something, if there isn't a change, everything's going to go to hell. This is what did our Rocket Man say last night? I don't know if you saw any clips of Rocket Man. This could be the last election. You've heard that rhetoric, which they've been saying since Carter, and maybe before him too. But I found clips all the way back to Carter saying this is the last election. So for almost 50 years. If we don't, and then you end up electing the other people, and they end up just like the other, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's what Rocket Man said, and he even wore his Occupy Mars shirt, So Trump said, if you're into conspiracies, he's the only man who's ever who's sent astronauts to space. You're like, wait a minute. Yeah, we've sent other people to space, haven't we? Anyway, it's kind of funny. I don't think we need to go to space. That's enough.
I agree.
Yeah.
What about the Simpsons episode?
What about,
Maybe? No, not maybe. It's a little one.
Lisa?
Lisa?
Where she's like dressed exactly like Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Did you see that?
No.
Oh, she's wearing exactly,
It's like 20 years ago.
and she's wearing exactly what,
The pantsuit and the whole deal.
saying the same thing.
Well,
That Trump's going to make the most, he's going to be president, and he's going to make the most debt in history.
Well, it does tell you, because I mentioned this with X-Files. We've been rewatching X-Files. Then that was mid-90s. Is that the script has already been written, and they're just playing parts, which is kind of aggravating because it's like.
It is, because you're like, can you just stop? We see what you're doing. Like, what?
Well, but undergirding that, and we'll connect it. What Solomon is talking about is this desire to be in control. Think about like climate is another one. Never mind. I think the data is fraudulent and whatever. The idea that man can cause global climate change, or that man can correct it, either way, is actually atheistic, right? You're denying that God could cause the climate to change, or he does, or that God has actually written that into the pattern of creation, that there's cycles to heat and cold, there's solar cycles, there's earth core temperature cycles. Everything else is cyclical. Why wouldn't that be? Okay, which we could observe. Or that we could fix it. Talk about the height of hubris without God.
Right. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah, it is. It is. And people buy into it, and they think it's just an ideology, but it's a religious ideology, right? Or that you can control family planning. You can control your family. You can't. You read this in the Bible, right? There's people who are fertile. There's people who are infertile. And the people who are fertile sometimes bemoan it. The people who are infertile bemoan it as well. And like, why don't you just trust God, like to give or to not give, and to pray to him if you don't have, right? Right, so the problem is, what do you do? And Solomon's answer is very straightforward here. He's going to repeat this in chapter 12, so he's going to come back to it at the very conclusion of the book as well. But it is to pray, praise, and give thanks. It's very straightforward. Yeah.
Sure, I mean,
Sure. Uses it all for good.
exactly, he will figure it out and give it.
And you're not denying the reality of a thing,
No,
which is what some people do. They're like, you refer, like you're at a funeral, and they're like, oh no, now they're in heaven. I'm like, but they're also dead,
right,
right? I mean, it's both.
right.
So you don't deny the reality of the thing, that this is a time for grieving.
And back to the hurricane too,
Mhm.
people think, why would God
Good question.
allow such a thing to happen?
Good question. Why would he permit that?
He's trying to get our attention.
Maybe. I mean, anything that you experience that causes you, you'll hear this in the sermon today, to beg the question, why God? You're already turning in faith then. You're saying,
Pardon me?
you're turning to God in faith.
Yeah, oh,
You're looking, well, or maybe it's very skeptical and very negative, but you're still asking God why. Whereas before, maybe you weren't praying at all.
right. And there's nothing wrong with asking God why.
Yeah. The problem is that if it's within, this distinction that we make as Lutherans, which between the hidden and revealed God. So there's God as he wants to be known by us, as a God of grace and mercy and peace. But then we ask, well, then why did you send the angel of the Lord to bring plague upon Jerusalem for David's census? Well, in that case, he tells you, because of the census was an act of rebellion against God's providence. David did not trust in the Lord, and so God brought judgment against David and all those under David, that's even harder to kind of stomach, right? It's like the people didn't do anything wrong. I mean, they went along with it, but David told them to count, so why should they be punished for what David did? And we don't necessarily have an answer. And we have to be willing to say, that's within the hidden nature of God. And anything that God has not revealed to us is always going to terrify us. Or horrify us even, like the hurricane, right? But if we say, those people don't trust in their possessions anymore because they don't have any. Those people are now dependent upon the care and support of others, and they're crying out for help, so we should seek opportunities to help. But that's not a bad thing, to learn to live not for oneself, but for others, and to receive. And it benefits those who take care of them as well, not just those who are in need. You may make new friends that way. The two gentlemen that were here to visit from Chicago, I didn't know that they were vacationing. His parents go to Maui every year, one of them. So they went along, and as friends and parents and whatever. So they were dining on Maui when the fire hit. They had gotten in the day before the fire, the Lahaina fire, and they were in Lahaina. Yeah, they were at a hotel on the edge of town, so they watched the fire at night, right? But they remarked, they would talk about how there was no state or federal activity, but the local churches and school people would use the schools. They were pulling together food. There was food coming in from other islands on boats from people. And even the hotel didn't have food either. So
I think you really see the community, comes together.
Right.
In those situations.
So we got caught up in the whole, well, why is there, and controversy and blue lasers and whatever. And they're like, actually what happened on the ground, it's terrifying, it's terrible, and it's still, I think one house has started framing of all those that were destroyed. Because the permitting and because they have to go through all this. They were all wooden houses, so you have to go through all this, and that's the dry side of the island. So you have to go through all this kind of permitting process to put up historic structures that are harder, and the state government's not helping and federal's not helping. Okay, fine, and yet you don't want to miss that there was actually some beautiful things that happened in the midst of that terrible, terrible thing. And that's not to make light of it. And if you've ever been through tragedy, it's, like I said, I went down to Houston after Hurricane Harvey, and We were providing aid. I was there with the comfort dog people and whatnot. And even just handing out $100 to people, would change their life that day, right? And you would see that in their faces, and never mind everything else. Even a stuffed animal for a child, or it's not necessarily food. You look at it. I think we're capable of actually living that way, but what we've done is we've shifted our charitable giving to these institutions and organizations that are, well, they're not passionate. They're dispassionate, and so.